Well, to discuss this, this commemorative events that will be taking place and the role that South Africa plays in a Pan-African society, we're now joined by Veli Mbele Kasompisi, who is the Afrocentric essayist and co-founder of the Mutapa, which is a think tank that focuses on Afrocentric dialogue and teaching of authentic history. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you for the opportunity, Babundoro.
So as I was reading the introduction there and what you're involved in, Africa, Pan-Africanism seems to be something that's very much your lifeblood. What does Africa Month mean to you personally before we start unpacking this conversation?
Yes, and like as you correctly say that Africa and issues related to Africans constitute my lifeblood. That's very apt. So personally, you know, Africa Month to me means a number of things, and one of the most important things, right, as I see it, especially where we are today as Africans, and it's one of the things that troubles me deeply. It is the fact that we as Africans have so much limited knowledge, right, about our continent, not just in contemporary terms, but also in historical terms as to what this continent is about and what this continent has achieved, right? And that concern of the very little that we know of our own history as Africans is what led to us setting up the think tank referred to as Mutapa, right? And we actually based our think tank, Mutapa, the name is an adaptation, Mutapa, from the ancient African kingdom, Mwena Mutapa, right? That constituted what we today call Southern Africa. So for me, when we talk Africa Month, right, one of the biggest things is our knowledge of ourselves and Africans and of our continent and what it is we are doing to teach, especially the young people of Africa, about this great continent of ours.
I mean, there's so much to discuss, and I suppose for me, it's perhaps we talk about decolonization often, and I'm not sure that we pay attention to what that actually means. I wonder if you can help us when we use that term. What are we actually trying to do, and what are we saying?
Yes, so decolonization, right, in simple terms and without even trying to sound esoteric about it. So decolonization is essentially the undoing, the dismantling of colonization, right, on the African continent, but also in other parts of the world that have been colonized. So that is what decolonization is essentially about. And in the context of Africa, decolonization arises out of the fact that between the 7th and the 15th century, right, the African continent found itself under siege from two principal oppressors or invaders, the Arabs and later the Europeans. And this led to the continent finding itself politically, economically, culturally, and even, you know, spiritually under the capture of the Arabs to the north and to the other parts of the continent, what is referred to as Sub-Sahara. You see a lot of the dominance of Europe continuing, right, in the various facets of our lives as African. But you also notice that even after African countries declared independence, right, and some other people refer to it as mere flag independence, you continue to see the residue of Arab and European colonization on the African continent. So decolonization has to do with undoing all of that and achieving what we call sovereignty for African people in all areas of people activity, economically, culturally, spiritually, and even militarily. Now, because we have not achieved that yet, the discourse on decolonization remains extremely relevant even today.
And I started there on purpose because I get a sense that to talk Pan-Africanism, actually a lot of undoing needs to happen, and that a lot of colonization still exists, and that's what's getting in the way
Absolutely.
of a true embracing of Pan-Africanism.
I fully agree, Babundora. And part of the problem in South Africa and on the African continent is that there is a lethargy, right, to actually break down these concepts and study them so that we use them appropriately. So if you take the example of Pan-Africanism, for instance, right, there are a lot of things that are done on a Pan-African basis, right, which means they are done on a broad basis to include or to cover the whole continent, right? Now, not everything that is Pan-African is necessarily Pan-Africanist. And what is the difference, right? Pan-Africanism is an anti-colonial philosophy or ideology. So not everything that calls itself Pan-African is necessarily anti-colonial or anti-neo-colonial or even anti-capitalist. And for me, it is important that we get the concepts right. And part of the problem in Africa has been the fact that there has been an obsession with using the concepts of Pan-African, right? When in fact, when you look what happens in practice is a perpetuation of colonialism, even under the guise of Pan-Africanism. And a good example is if you look at the fundamental differences between the Organization of African Unity and the African Union on the other hand, right? Now, even though the African Union is referred to as a successor organization to the OAU, but if you study what the OAU sought to achieve and what the AU is pursuing, right? The AU is essentially positioned along the neoliberal agenda, right? Which means it seems to concern itself with managing colonialism and managing capitalism and not dismantling it. Whereas the OAU did not want to manage colonialism or to this thing or capitalism. It wanted to dismantle it. And this is because we haven't gotten the conceptual and ideological things right. So there continues to be a need for us to continue to educate ourselves as Africans on the meaning of concepts like Pan-Africanism and decolonization.
All right, so it sounds like a great idea, this Pan-African identity. And I think about Europe and I realize that the French are nothing like the English. The Italians might be like the Portuguese, might be like the Spanish, but once you start to get to Ukraine and Belarus and Russia even, the story changes quite a bit, although they call themselves Europeans. Are we not trying to do the same thing here, though, that we want to have this continental identity, but the reality actually on the ground is we might be as different as the English are with the Russians?
Yes, and okay, that's a good comparison because it allows us to actually elucidate the point even better, right? So our differences, right, whether real or imagined as African people, a number of those differences have their genesis in colonialism, right? Ethos like tribalism, ethnic chauvinism, right? And even what people referred to as xenophobia, which is actually not xenophobia, but it has to do more with the deep levels of the extent to which colonialism has entrenched self-hate. So when you refer to it, for example, as xenophobia, it is very superficial, right? Because the deeper problem here is the extent to which we have, as Africans, have internalized the self-hate, which is as a result of colonial invasion, etc. Now, you must also understand that while there may be those differences, right, that you cited amongst the people that call themselves Europeans, what is important for us to understand is that insofar as the agenda of Europe is concerned, right, in Africa and against Africans, the Europeans historically stood together. And one example that demonstrates how Europeans are able to overlook what you have identified as their differences is that gathering of European criminals, right? The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, right? Which has resulted, right, in structuring the project of European imperialism in the way that we know it today. The fact that you have Lusophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, Francophone Africa, and all of those things is a direct result of that gathering of criminals, right? The Berlin Conference. So my point is that one of the things that we must understand is that our position in the world as Africans is different in the sense that many of the groups, right, when they think of a group to dominate, to exploit, to conquer, right, in the majority of cases, Africans become that group. And I've made the example when we started that when we talk colonialism, for instance, we like to talk about, we started with European colonialism, which is around the 15th century. But we need to go back, you know, that before the Europeans came here, our colonizers for almost 1,000 years were the Arabs, right? And you can go back if you want to, there's the Assyrians who also invaded many parts of this continent. So for us, it's always important to understand what is called positionality, right? So what place do we occupy in history so that we are able to define our relationship with other groups? And it is that type of thing that I think we must still clarify. And for that reason, we have more than enough reason to try to build unity, to try to build solidarity, to try and build cooperation, because many of the groups have organized themselves against us. I mean, Babundoro, look at the human pyramid globally. Africans are at the bottom. Globally, we are at the bottom. So Pan-Africanism, decolonization is extremely important. And the differences, like I said, are artificial.
So how do we, in a month like Africa Month and Africa Day on the 25th, how do we start to build this new culture, this new way of thinking and being, where we say, yes, we might be different, we might even speak different languages, but actually we should do what the Europeans did, unite and take on the world?
So the important thing, right, for any people globally or throughout history is that you can never build anything as a people or as a group if you do not have a valid understanding of your history as to who you are in the world. And until we as Africans achieve a relatively high level, right, of what is called knowledge of self, all of the other things will be very easy to do. And in a month like Africa Month, right, one of the things that we must dedicate ourselves to, who do work that has to do with the teaching of authentic African history, right, is to make sure that we spend as much time with the young people of Africa to teach them, right, the type of history that the academic institutions and the mass media does not share with them. Teach them, for instance, about the fact that they are the birthplace of mathematics, of logic, of spirituality, of science, right? That Africa is the birthplace of those things. And those are the types of things that will help build the confidence of Africans, right? And that's where we should start, right? And the point that I am making is that it's something that we were taught by the great Marcus Garvey, that if you enter any project, any battle, right, with self-doubt, you are defeated even before you start. So if we have proper knowledge of self, we will look at our problems and our challenges as Africans, and we won't be intimidated by our challenges, and we will believe that, like our ancestors did in antiquity, it is possible for us to reinvent ourselves. It is possible for us to build a different Africa, right? Where we can be human beings of our own creation and of our own value. And I believe that it is possible. And we must just get many of us to believe that it is possible. And half of our job will be done.
All right, we've run out of time, but perhaps finally, how do we bring on board those people who are resisting, who are holding on to Berlin Conference borders as if they are the Holy Grail? I look at a country like Nigeria and Niger. You've got Hausa people on both sides of this border. They speak the same Hausa language, and then their colonial language is French and English, and that then divides them. How do we bring people who are resisting, who are saying #no, I don't want to be part of this Pan-African project, I just want to be in this border, in this area, and keep everybody else out?
And we must think 100 years from now, right? As to what type of Africa do we want to have 100 years from now. And one of the things we must do to solve the type of problem that you are highlighting, because it's a complex thing, we must invest in the development of a new cadre of African leadership, right? That will prioritize the unity of African people, that will prioritize the advancement of African people, but most importantly, a new cadre of African leaders who are going to be incorruptible, right? Who are not going to be the type of leaders who, when shiny things are dangled in front of them, they will sell out their countries or this thing, or the continent, which is the richest continent in the world. So for me, one of the solutions to our existential problems as Africans is in the development of a specific caliber of African leaders. And this is important because the great Africans of antiquity, right, teach us that unless you have a group in society that has the type of vision that we are articulating, these things are not going to happen through osmosis. So you need to have a deliberate group of people who sit, think, and plan, but also work towards the Africa that you and I dream of, you know. And like I said, I believe it is possible. So for me, the critical thing is for us to build a new cadre of African leaders who are Afrocentric in their outlook and love Africa and her people unconditionally.
My dear brother, we're going to have to leave it there, but a promise that I'm going to make to you, because I think these conversations are very important, is that we're going to have them more frequently, more often, and we can unpack some of these issues bit by bit, so that we can start to, get this thinking up and running. So that's a promise I'm going to make to you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us this evening.